Ethan Cole had traveled across many worlds, but nothing prepared him for the harsh beauty of Zereth, a land of jagged mountains, burning skies, and warrior clans who valued strength above all else. He had come seeking dialogue, but he soon learned that humans were not welcomed with open arms, for the people of Zereth respected only those who could prove themselves in combat. And so when the towering gates of the royal citadel opened, and the crowd of armored aliens gathered, he knew his test was about to begin, yet he had not expected the challenge to come from Princess Liara herself, the heir to the throne and famed across the galaxy for her skill with the blade, and her unwavering pride, her figure tall and commanding with silver armor gleaming under the sun, her eyes sharp like fire, and her voice carrying across the courtyard, as she declared that no outsider could speak before the council, unless he survived a duel against her. Ethan, though untrained in the way of Zereth combat, stood his ground, his heart pounding as the echo of her challenge rolled over him, and the crowd cheered, waiting to see the human fail. Yet what none of them could predict was the mark hidden beneath the sleeve of his jacket, a tattoo etched in black lines, passed to him from his father and never explained, a secret he never understood but always carried. And as he pulled off his jacket to ready himself for the duel, the mark was revealed for all to see, twisting across his forearm like fire and ash, unfamiliar to Ethan but not to Liara, who froze in mid-step, her confident smile faltering as her eyes widened, and for the first time her blade lowered instead of rising. Silence fell over the citadel as the alien princess stared at him, her breath caught as if she had seen a ghost, her soldiers exchanging confused looks, and Ethan, bewildered by her sudden hesitation, felt the crowd's energy shift from excitement to unease, for they had never witnessed their princess waver, and the sight unsettled them deeply. Whispers racing through the courtyard like sparks in dry grass. Ethan could not understand why she looked at him that way, nor why her eyes reflected both fear and recognition, but he remembered his father's words from long ago, whispered on his deathbed, "Never let them see the mark, Ethan, for one day. It will mean more than you can imagine." And now those words burned in his mind as the princess, usually fearless, seemed almost shaken, her fingers tightening on her weapon as if she battled something within herself. And he wondered if the tattoo was more than a simple design, perhaps tied to some story far older than himself, perhaps linked to this very people who now watched in confusion. The silence grew unbearable until finally Liara spoke, her voice quieter, not the booming command of a princess, but the careful question of someone confronting destiny, asking him where he had gotten that mark. Yet Ethan had no answer beyond family inheritance, and though he tried to explain, the words caught in his throat because she did not appear to be listening. Her gaze locked on his arm, as if she feared it would vanish if she looked away. And then, without warning, she stepped back, lowering her blade fully, shocking her guards who shouted in protest, demanding she continue the duel. But Liara ignored them, her mind trapped in memory, recalling ancient stories whispered by her tutors of a human who once bore that same mark, a figure from the past whose presence had changed the fate of Zereth. And though centuries had passed, the mark remained forbidden, a secret kept only in royal records. Ethan could feel the weight of every alien eye upon him, the tension pressing like stone, and he stood frozen, not because of fear, but because for the first time he felt something stir inside him. When the mark was seen, as if the lines on his skin pulsed with hidden life, faint warmth spreading from his arm to his chest, and he knew this moment was not chance, but something larger than himself, though he could not yet grasp what. The crowd grew restless, their cheers turning into murmurs, some demanding the duel, others sensing something greater at play. And Ethan realized he was caught in the center of a storm he could neither control nor escape, his fate tangled with that of the princess, who now regarded him not as an enemy but as a riddle. And though he longed for answers, he felt only the rising dread that whatever secret his father had hidden from him was about to shatter the fragile peace of this world. Liara lifted her chin at last, her expression unreadable, and announced that the duel would not continue, shocking everyone present, declaring instead that the human must be brought before the council chambers immediately, her tone final and unyielding. And while her guards reluctantly obeyed, Ethan could not shake the feeling that his journey had only just begun, that the tattoo he once dismissed as a meaningless inheritance was in truth the key to a destiny written long before he was born. And as the soldiers led him through the grand gates under the wary eyes of the people, he glanced once more at the princess, and though her face remained composed, he caught the faintest flicker of fear and perhaps recognition that made him realize she knew something he did not, something that could change both their worlds forever. Ethan walked through the towering gates of the citadel, surrounded by guards whose eyes held both suspicion and fear, and though he tried to appear calm, inside his thoughts spun like a storm, for he could not understand why the tattoo on his arm had silenced an entire court of warriors, nor why the alien Princess Liara, a figure known for never showing weakness, had faltered when she saw it. And as the heavy doors of the royal hall closed behind them, shutting out the roar of the restless crowd, Ethan felt the air change colder, heavier, as if the stones themselves carried secrets. And Liara herself walked beside him in silence, her gaze fixed ahead, her hands still tight on her blade but her steps slower, as though she carried the weight of something unseen. And Ethan, uncertain if he was a prisoner or a guest, struggled to keep pace, each step echoing loudly on the marble floor until they reached the Grand Council chamber, a vast circular hall carved from black stone, its walls etched with ancient markings that glowed faintly as if alive. And in the center stood the council seats where elders of Zereth awaited, their robes flowing, their faces lined with wisdom and suspicion. And when Liara entered with Ethan at her side, their expressions hardened, for they expected a defeated human, not one who had caused their princess to end a duel without a strike. And as they demanded an explanation, Liara's voice cut through the chamber, not filled with the fiery defiance she had shown before, but with a tone heavy with caution, as she told them of the mark on Ethan's arm, a mark she claimed belonged to the lost bloodline, a legend that most had dismissed as myth. And the elders shifted uneasily, some whispering, others scowling, while Ethan stood at the center of their circle, feeling as though every heartbeat was being measured, his tattoo burning faintly against his skin as if it knew it was being judged. Liara turned to him suddenly, her eyes narrowing, and she asked him again where he had gotten the mark, her voice sharper, almost desperate now. And Ethan, though overwhelmed, gave the only truth he knew, that it had been on him since childhood, passed from his father, who never explained it, only warned him to keep it hidden. And as those words fell, the room grew tense, the elders exchanging troubled looks, for the stories they knew spoke of a human long ago, who had forged peace between their people and Earth, a human who bore that same mark but vanished before the war returned. And though centuries had erased details, the symbol remained a forbidden memory tied to a prophecy none dared to speak aloud. Ethan could feel the suspicion growing around him, the weight of old grudges pressing down. And for the first time, he wondered if the mark was not a blessing but a curse, a target painted on him long before his birth. And when one elder rose, his voice thundered with anger as he accused Ethan of deception, claiming the human carried the mark to manipulate their traditions. The guards shifted, ready to strike, and Ethan felt panic clawing at him. But then Liara stepped forward, her blade raised not against him, but against her own council, declaring that no harm would come to him until the truth was revealed. And the chamber erupted into shouts, half the elders condemning her defiance, others demanding patience, while Ethan stood frozen in the center, his heart racing as he realized he had become the spark in a fire older than himself. And as the argument raged, he caught a glimpse of the glowing carvings on the wall, shapes that matched his tattoo, lines that seemed to move when he stared too long. And a sudden vision swept over him, flashes of battlefields, alien ships burning, and two figures standing side by side, one human, one alien, their arms bearing the same mark. And though the vision lasted only a breath, it left Ethan trembling, his chest tight, his mind racing with questions he could not voice. And when his eyes lifted again, he found Liara watching him closely, her expression unreadable but her silence speaking volumes, for she seemed to know he had seen something. And in that unspoken moment, he understood that the tattoo was not merely an inheritance, but a key to something vast, dangerous, and unavoidable, and though fear threatened to overtake him, a strange determination rose in him too, for he sensed that his father's warning had not been about hiding forever, but about surviving long enough to face the truth. And now, surrounded by enemies and the wary eyes of the princess herself, Ethan realized the frozen moment was not ending, but only deepening, binding him to a destiny that would demand far more than courage. It would demand the trust of a woman who moments ago had wanted to test him with steel. And the question now was not whether he would survive, but whether he and Liara could uncover the truth before the shadows of prophecy consumed them both. Ethan stood in the council chamber long after the shouts of the elders faded, his mind clouded by the vision that had struck him. But before he could speak, Liara ordered the guards to escort him deeper into the citadel, away from the angry council and into the royal archive, a place where outsiders had never stepped. And though Ethan was unsure if he was walking toward answers or a prison cell, he followed, his eyes tracing the tall walls carved with glowing symbols that seemed to pulse as if they recognized him, until the corridor ended at a massive stone door that shimmered with blue light, a door that opened only when Liara pressed her hand against its surface, revealing a hidden chamber filled with relics of the past, statues of warriors, scrolls preserved in crystal, and murals painted with golden ink. And as Ethan stepped inside, a chill swept over him, for across the far wall stretched a painting of two figures locked in battle against a shadowy enemy, one figure unmistakably human, the other clearly Zereth, and both bore the same tattoo that burned now on his arm. And when he turned to Liara, he saw no surprise in her face but something deeper, something heavy, as though she had always feared this day would come. And she began to speak in a low voice, telling him of the legend of the lost bloodline, of a time when humans and Zereth had once stood together against a darkness that swept the stars, of a warrior who carried the mark and fought beside her own ancestors, but who vanished before the final battle, leaving only the prophecy that one day the mark would return, carried by a stranger from beyond their world, and that this stranger would either bring unity or destruction. Ethan listened, each word striking him like a stone, for it made no sense how his family, ordinary humans from Earth, could be tied to such a story. Yet the tattoo on his arm glowed faintly in the chamber, answering questions he had never thought to ask, and though he wanted to deny it, to claim it was chance or coincidence, deep inside he felt the truth pressing closer, as if the mark itself wanted him to accept it. Liara moved to one of the crystal cases and revealed an old artifact, a fragment of metal etched with the same lines as his tattoo. And when Ethan reached out, the mark on his arm pulsed with heat, the fragment glowing to life as if awakened by his touch, and the sight unsettled him so deeply he pulled back. But Liara's gaze remained fixed on him, and she whispered that the mark was not just a symbol but a bond, one that tied him to the history of her people whether he wished it or not. And Ethan felt the walls of fate closing in, a path being laid before him that he had no power to refuse. Still, questions tore at him. Why his father had warned him to keep it hidden, why his family carried something meant for alien legends, and whether his very existence had been shaped by forces he could not understand. And Liara, sensing his turmoil, admitted she too did not know the full truth, for the records were incomplete, some destroyed, some locked away, as if someone long ago had wanted the memory of the human ally erased. And that thought chilled Ethan, for it meant someone feared the mark and its return, and perhaps even now, enemies hidden among her own people feared him too, which explained the anger of the council. The chamber grew colder, the glowing walls dimming, and Ethan felt a strange weight in the air, as though the secrets themselves were alive, watching him. And when he looked at Liara, he saw not the fierce warrior who had once challenged him, but a woman torn between duty and instinct, torn between protecting her world and trusting a stranger, whose very presence threatened everything she knew. And Ethan, though filled with doubt, realized he had crossed a threshold he could never step back from, for the secrets of the mark had begun to unravel, and the more he learned, the more he understood that his life was no longer his own. And as silence settled between them, broken only by the hum of the relics, a faint rumble echoed through the chamber walls, a reminder that time was running short. and that while the answers lay hidden in the past, danger was already rising in the present, watching, waiting, ready to strike before he could uncover the full truth of who he really was and why the alien princess had frozen at the sight of his tattoo. The ancient chamber of relics soon felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. For as Ethan and Liara studied the glowing walls and the mysterious fragment that had awakened to his touch, they both sensed that unseen eyes were watching them, and indeed far above the citadel, hidden in the shadows of the towers. Rival clans had already learned of the human who carried the forbidden mark, their whispers spreading through the city like poison, stirring unrest and planting seeds of rebellion. And though Liara dismissed the guards and led Ethan out into the winding halls, the weight of that silent threat followed close behind, like footsteps just out of sight. And Ethan, though new to the world of Zereth, felt instinctively that danger was circling, for the looks of the palace guards had shifted from curiosity to suspicion, their hands resting too tightly on the hilts of their blades, their voices falling silent whenever he passed, and even the servants bowed too quickly, their eyes darting toward the tattoo hidden beneath his sleeve, as if they feared the very sight of it. And he realized that while Liara's protection had saved him for now, her own power was fragile, for already her defiance against the council was being twisted into weakness. Her enemies calling her judgment clouded, some whispering that she was bewitched by the human, others claiming she conspired with him. And the more Ethan walked through the palace, the more he felt the invisible threads of a trap closing around them both, until finally Liara led him into her private chamber, a vast hall lined with banners and maps of the stars, where her voice dropped low and steady as she confessed that rival clans would never allow him to live if they believed the mark was real. For to them the prophecy was not hope but a threat, a chance that the balance of power would be broken. And Ethan listened in silence, his mind racing with the memory of the vision he had seen on the glowing wall, the flashes of fire and battle. And though he wanted to dismiss it as imagination, the pulse of warmth in his arm told him it was real. And he knew the enemies Liara spoke of were not only within the palace, but waiting outside, watching, planning, ready to strike the moment weakness appeared. And as she moved closer, her silver eyes sharper now with worry rather than pride, she admitted she had taken a risk defending him before the council. For if the clans united against her, not even the royal guard could keep her throne secure. Yet she could not ignore what she had seen when she looked at him, the mark glowing as if alive. And she believed fate had brought him for a reason, though she did not yet know whether that reason was salvation or ruin. And before Ethan could answer, before he could voice his confusion or his fear, a loud crash shook the outer halls, followed by shouts of alarm, the echo of steel clashing against steel. And Liara's hand went instantly to her blade as the doors burst open, revealing one of her trusted guards bleeding and staggering, warning her that assassins had entered the palace, their target not only the human, but the princess herself. And Ethan felt his stomach drop, realizing the shadows he had sensed had finally moved, that the whispers had become action, and that the fragile thread holding his fate together was about to snap, forcing him to choose whether to hide from the danger or stand beside the princess, who had once challenged him but now needed his courage more than ever. The air inside Liara's chamber grew sharp with the metallic scent of blood as the wounded guard collapsed at her feet, his warning barely spoken before silence claimed him. And Ethan felt the walls close in as shadows flickered in the torchlight, for the assassins were already near, their footsteps swift, their blades whispering against stone. And Liara's expression hardened as she drew her weapon, silver steel catching the light like fire, her posture tense yet graceful. And without hesitation she motioned Ethan behind her, though he knew hiding would not keep him safe. For the doors burst open again, and masked figures in dark armor poured inside, their eyes cold with purpose, their voices silent as they lunged forward. And Ethan, heart pounding, stumbled back as Liara met the first wave with the precision of a warrior born, her strikes fast and merciless, each blow echoing in the chamber. Yet even as she cut down her enemies, more pressed forward, their blades aiming not only for her, but for him. And in the chaos Ethan felt his arm burn with sudden heat, the tattoo beneath his sleeve glowing faintly as if reacting to danger. And though he had no weapon, no training in alien combat, he grabbed a fallen spear from the floor, clutching it with trembling hands as the nearest assassin lunged at him. And by instinct alone he raised the spear, deflecting the strike in a clumsy move that should have ended in his death. Yet the mark on his arm pulsed with a strange energy, guiding his body, turning fear into motion, and somehow he drove the attacker back, surprising both himself and Liara, who caught the moment in her peripheral glance, but said nothing, for the chamber had no time for words, only survival. Then, as Ethan fought to keep his footing, a sudden cry rang out above the clash, and from the rear of the attackers stepped a figure without a mask, a face Ethan recognized from the council, one of Liara's most trusted advisors, a man named Sroth, whose voice had once carried loyalty, but now carried venom as he shouted that the mark was a lie, a curse meant to trick their people, and that Liara had betrayed Zereth by defending the human. And Ethan froze, the weight of betrayal heavier than the blades swinging around him. For the man's eyes glowed with hatred and ambition, revealing that this attack was not only meant to kill them, but to seize power for himself. And the shock rippled through Liara too, though she masked it with steel, her strikes growing sharper as she cut down those who had once sworn allegiance to her, her heart burning with rage at the treachery. Yet the tide was turning, for the assassins outnumbered them, and even with her skill and Ethan's desperate strikes, the walls seemed to close tighter with every breath, until finally Sroth himself stepped forward, his own blade long and curved, his smile cruel as he raised it to finish Ethan, declaring that no outsider would live to defile their prophecy. But in that instant the mark on Ethan's arm flared brighter than before, a surge of energy flooding his chest, his vision sharpening as if the world slowed. And when Sroth struck, Ethan lifted the spear with unnatural speed, parrying the blow in a move he could not have managed alone, the clash sending a shockwave through the chamber, stunning both combatants. And in that frozen heartbeat Liara seized the chance, striking Sroth across the arm and forcing him back, though not enough to end him, for he retreated with a snarl, shouting that the council would demand Ethan's blood, and that she would be cast aside for protecting him. And with a signal, the surviving assassins withdrew into the shadows, leaving the chamber scarred and smeared with blood, their threat lingering like poison in the air. And Ethan, gasping, dropped the spear, his arm still burning with light, while Liara sheathed her blade with trembling hands, her face pale but her eyes fierce. And in that moment both knew the truth. The betrayal was not an isolated act, but the beginning of something larger, a war within their own walls. And if they stayed, the council would not only condemn Ethan, but strip Liara of her throne. So with no choice left, she turned to him and whispered that they must leave the palace at once, for the shadows had already won the council, and the only chance to survive now lay beyond the city, where the ruins of the past awaited, holding answers that could either save them or destroy everything. The palace lights faded behind them as Ethan and Liara slipped into the wilderness. Under the cover of night, the shadows of betrayal still heavy in their minds, the air filled with the distant echo of war horns as rival clans stirred in the city. And though exhaustion tugged at Ethan's body, he pressed forward, guided only by Liara's steady stride through the darkened paths that wound into the mountains, where jagged cliffs towered above them like silent guardians, and the wind howled, with a voice that seemed to carry warnings from the past. And as they climbed higher, the mark on Ethan's arm pulsed stronger, its glow faint beneath his sleeve but constant, as though it knew they were nearing something long hidden. And finally, after hours of climbing through stone and silence, they reached a wide plateau where ancient ruins rose from the earth, broken, pillars carved with the same swirling lines as his tattoo, their surfaces cracked but still alive with faint blue light. And Liara slowed, her voice hushed as she told him this was the place her ancestors had once spoken of in whispers, the sanctuary of the First Alliance, sealed for centuries, its secrets untouched, waiting for the return of the one who bore the mark. And Ethan, though his breath came heavy, felt an odd pull toward the largest structure, a towering archway, half buried in stone, its center filled with a slab etched with runes that matched the shape of his arm. And as he stepped closer, the mark on his skin blazed, heat rushing through him until his vision blurred, and he saw again the flashes of the prophecy humans and Zereth fighting side by side, a looming enemy of shadow stretching across the stars, and two figures standing together at the center of the storm, one of them bearing his face, the other unmistakably Liara. The vision left him trembling, yet before he could speak, Liara urged him onward, her own eyes wide as if she'd have felt something stirring in the air. And with hesitant hands Ethan placed his palm against the rune-etched slab, the glow from his mark spilling across the stone like fire racing through veins, until the slab cracked open with a roar and the archway came alive, light spilling from within. And the earth itself trembled as the sanctuary awoke, its walls humming with power, its pillars glowing brighter until the whole plateau seemed to burn with ancient fire. And from the center rose a relic of unimaginable design, a crystalline sphere floating above a pedestal, projecting visions of star maps, battles, and warnings. And in that moment Ethan and Liara understood that the mark was not a weapon, but a key, one that unlocked the memory of an alliance forged long ago to stand against an enemy, greater than either of their people, an enemy that had not been defeated, but only delayed, waiting in the darkness to rise again. And as the sphere pulsed brighter, the mark on Ethan's arm connected to it, binding him with a surge of energy that nearly brought him to his knees. But Liara caught him, her grip firm, her presence steady, and together they stood as the light wrapped around them both, branding her with a faint echo of his mark across her hand, a sign that their fates were now joined, human and Zereth bound by destiny. And though fear lingered in Ethan's heart, he felt something greater rise within him, a resolve he never knew he carried. For now he understood why his father had warned him, why the princess had frozen when she first saw the tattoo, why enemies feared him because he was never meant to walk alone. He was meant to stand here, with her, at the edge of history, as the first guardian of a new alliance. And as the light dimmed and silence returned, the ruins no longer felt dead but alive, watching, waiting. And Liara turned to him with eyes that no longer saw him as an outsider, but as a partner. And with quiet strength she vowed that together they would unite their worlds before the shadows returned. And Ethan, though still uncertain of the path ahead, nodded, knowing there was no turning back, for the awakening had begun, and the future of both their peoples now rested in their hands.